for a second, but I'll give you a... Okay, I think we're good.
We're good. What's happening, everybody? I hope I didn't like bust your eardrums. But we are the Accountability Success Circle, and this is our monthly webinar. I am super excited to jump into this because you know balance is something that we all need. And, and oh my gosh, that's a little embarrassing because I can hear myself. Hopefully, you don't hear that echo. Uh, Technical difficulties, it happens. Let me fix that.
I'm
Because
always afraid that that's going to happen to me, and then
that happened to me. So,
yay.
yay, I could say I survived it. So, anywho, we're all about talking. We're talking about balance. And April has some amazing, amazing, amazing content for us. We're going to be debunking some myths about busy people, things that we all thought would help us succeed. And the end goal about this is to get a roadmap, get a game plan to help you personalize your life so that you can get the most out of life and feel fulfilled. Because at the end of the day, it's not about like just working to live, or I think I got this right. We don't live to work. We work to live. I think I said that right. Either way, my main point is all about doing it your way right away. And
Now.
yes, April is the queen of that. So I'm going to be here taking notes as well, monitoring the chat, chiming in where necessary. And I am so honored to introduce April, there she is. Hi. My partner in crime, who's going to blow it up for all of you. So, hi, April. Welcome.
Awesome. Thank you
Floor
for
is
the
yours.
little intro. So, as you know, in the Accountability Success Circle, we chose balance for this month, and it was kind of my idea. This is actually a theme that we haven't done yet. In the 3 years that we have been doing these well, that we've been doing themes. We started webinars about a couple years ago. So I just figured now is great as of time as ever, as we're starting to dive into post-pandemic life. I mean, we're still in the thick of it, but we're seeing the end of the tunnel. And I've gone through a lot of changes over the last 6 months even, and we've all kind of had to adjust to a new normal for the last year plus. And I think that now is a really good time to really think about, okay, we're going to start going back to normal. We have the reflection of what life used to look like pre-pandemic. We know what we've been dealing with for the last 13 months amidst the pandemic, and we are going to slowly, hopefully, and surely go back to something normal. But we have the opportunity to make this new normal something different for ourselves. Reflecting on some of the things that I personally did prior to the pandemic, I had my calendar completely stacked. Every weekend there was always like 1-2 events going on, sometimes in a day, but definitely always like having outings, and it was a very busy time. And having to be stuck at home, I've almost started to embrace, like, okay, I don't want to do anything this weekend. Maybe I have one thing at the most. And so the reason why this is important is because I think we would all agree that work-life balance or work-life harmony, however way you want to call it, is something that we want to strive, because there's something about the term that feels peaceful, maybe. But I think that that's all what we're all striving to do. We don't want to be like, oh my God, my life is so crazy. That seems to be sometimes what I'm always saying. And when I'm feeling balanced is when I'm not saying that. Like, oh my God, it's just so busy, so crazy. And so today I want to talk about this concept of balance. I mean, there was this thing that almost 4 years ago that I kind of wrote, and this book was realization for me to really understand what that was, because this is what I wanted, but I actually didn't know what balance was. And in the process of writing this book, I really got a good perspective. Like, Gary's got it too. Like, yay! You'll see that I have a lot of sticky notes, and like this is a book that I wrote, but I sometimes have to, refer to it on because I kind of know it, but I sometimes need a reminder, especially when I'm in my own stuff. And so I'm going to, for those of you who haven't read this book, which you can get on Amazon or you can download on Audible, and I will, verbalize the book to you. It's a really quick read because, everybody's busy and they don't need to, I didn't need to write a novel about it, but I tried to get to the point of, what is balance and how do you do that successfully for yourself. So I'm going to give some spoilers for those of you who haven't read this book yet, and maybe incentivize you to kind of think about maybe you do want to download it or listen to it, or if you've already purchased the book, which I know that I've sold a good number of copies, maybe this is a time that you bring this out and you just kind of remind yourself, because this book is, I share a lot of my own journey in this book, but I use that as a benchmark for you to see, what is possible, or, like what exists out there. Not, this is not a, like, let me tell you my life story, but has applicable tools and tricks to kind of think about how you achieve balance. So I'm going to share some of that today. And we're going to go through it. So the first thing that I want you guys to all know when it comes to balance is that balance is not something that is easily defined. I noticed this as I was doing my research, because when I first started the Cheerful Mind, I thought about, I want people to have work-life balance. But what was interesting was that a lot of people were talking about work-life balance, but there was not really any definition of what that meant. And then on top of that, I noticed that there were a lot of triggers around the concept of work-life balance, because some people don't think it exists, that it's possible to just like have everything, a little bit of everything and everything's running smoothly. That they would go to things like, I'm going to call it harmony, like everything's blended and there's just a mixture. But like when it comes down to it, like it's all the same thing, because balance is a very subjective definition. It's subjective to you individually, and you can't look at how somebody defines balance and say that that's balance for you. That was one of the biggest realizations, and the biggest, spoilers of this book, is that balance is not defined. And there's no hard set definition out there. Um, but what you want to think about when it comes to balance is that those feelings and the end goal that you're working towards. And so for me, a lot of it is like, I want to be happy and I want to feel peaceful. And so my balance is based on, or my balance definition is based on chasing that feeling of like not feeling crazy. Like I tend to get overwhelmed. And when I'm overwhelmed, I'm not balanced. But what causes the overwhelm can change from time to time. When I was in college, I could have said, like, oh, I have to go to all of these parties every weekend, but I still have to get good grades. And that was balance for me back then. Whereas now it's like, making sure that my kids are on top of their stuff, and then being able to have time to do my stuff and just not feeling overwhelmed. And so your balance definition is one that you have to um, craft on your own, and that's where the journey starts. Like if you're having triggers around the concept of balance, it might just be because you're trying to mold to a definition that is not yours. So first things first, the way that you can start to achieve balance is to really come up with that definition. Think about the feelings, think about what you're working towards, and then all the other stuff can follow. Gary, do you have any thoughts, and do you want to share what your definition of balance is?
Yeah, you bring up a really good point about um, the customization. And for me, I find that I'm not in balance when a few things like start to show up. Like when I am like not sleeping well, or I resort back to sort of coping mechanisms. I really love sweets, and there's a place for sweets, and I have that. But I find like when I'm in balance, like I'm good. Like, I'll have sweets here and there, but like I find like some of the things that are like, oh, that's like a warning sign. Better look into like what's off is like when I'm like, oh man, I need, oh sweet. And it becomes like almost like an unconscious thing. So for me is I know that I'm in balance when I don't know, like I am following these new uh things that I set for myself that make sense, like my meditation and working out and stuff like that. And there's time for family, and I know it's going to ebb and flow. But when I have a tendency to sort of like hide in my work, that's like one of those things. I'm like, oh, something must be off. I should look into that. And so that's my main thing of understanding. Oh yeah, this feels off.
Yeah. So Gary brings up a good point because there's a lot of like it might even be hard to define sometimes because it might be focused on that feeling. What I heard in, what you were sharing is that like being able to stay focused on what your priorities are. That sounds to, seems to be one, but then also making sure that you're not doing anything in excess, right? So you're not always diving into work, you're not always diving into family, but you're not necessarily saying like 50% of the time in my life is to be spent on family and 50% on this, and I have to travel like every 2 months or something like that. Like those definitions could be part of somebody's balance definition, but they aren't necessarily in yours. So there is this ebb and flow of like I know what's there, but like I need to make sure that I'm focusing on my priorities and that everything's kind of humming. That's kind of what I gathered from. Does that sound right?
Yes,
Yeah. And I
that's
think
why
that
you're the
our
queen.
definitions are similar, right? Oh, I gotta give you a high five. Yeah.
Yep.
Um, so that is interesting. And if anybody is watching live, thank you for watching live. I think
Terry is Terry Brown.
Terry, I'd also love to hear what your definition um of balance might be, and or what are the feelings associated. Now, one of the things about why balance is so difficult to achieve, which I kind of mentioned a little bit before, is A, like you have to define it first. But B, like your definition can change. So I think that prior to COVID happening, I was like, okay, I want to make sure that I'm not going on vacation. Like there needs to be like 3 weeks in between travel because I need to get resituated at home and then be ready to like pack and go again. Like I had very specific things of, okay, I only want to try to focus on, one social outing per day on the weekends, and I'm not going to go out during the weekdays. Like I was very, very specific. And sometimes that can work to your advantage, but sometimes it can also be a detriment, especially when like unexpected things happen, like a pandemic, right? So, um, understanding, what that looks like, what success in balance would look like for you, can take some real thought. And also to just know that it can change at any time, right? Because once the pandemic hit, it was like, okay, we can't go anywhere. So my form of balance at first was just like, let me make sure that I'm connecting with people. And then as the pandemic went on, I was like, I need to stay off Zoom as much as possible because that was part of my balance definition. It was like I can't spend 9 hours a day on Zoom, even though it means so much to connect to other people. Like I might need to spend time connecting with myself in solitude because who knows how much longer I'm going to have this. And so thinking about the reason that it's so hard to maintain balance, just like you're spinning a plate, right? You have to keep things going and you kind of have to adapt to what's happening or the plate will fall, right? And it'll shatter all over the ground. So it's like you constantly have to be checking in on it and being, am I feeling balanced, doing that constant reflection, which I'll talk about a little bit more later in terms of how to actually put this in practice, because balance can be this very subjective term, but to actually maintain it isn't a whole nother challenge, which is why this topic is I'm so passionate about and so important because it is a moving target constantly. Somebody I want to share this like quote that somebody was applying to something else, but I feel like it really relates to balance. Is this idea that like, you know, staying balanced is like a marathon, except you don't know where you're you don't know what mile you're on, and you don't know um you don't know like where you're headed, right? So there's, I mean, and I think that that applies to a lot of things in life, but I think it really does apply to balance too. Like you're constantly trying to adapt to everything that is happening. Terry said that balance is being able to adjust your flow based on your priorities and values, and being able to be fully present with what you're doing without intense FOMO. That is key too. You know, there's so many things that we want to do, but like, you know, sometimes we also have to pick and choose and sacrifice some of the things that we might want in the name of saying yes to other things we want. So that was awesome. Thank you. Um, so when it comes to finding balance, one of the approaches that I take to this concept and just everything in life is that, you know, I mentioned that the definition needs to be your own, and it's super essential that you choose balance and that definition in an authentic way. You have to really think about introspectively, like, who am I as a person, what are my values, and how am I going to juggle, in a sense, all of the things that are important to me, right? Because we are not all, you know, or there are people that exist out there that's like, I'm all about fitness and I'm going to dive into that. And there's other people who are like, I'm all about family. And that could be balanced, to just really be focused on, you know, one or two core things. But, you know, for some people who I know in the ASC who are like really into like, I want to do a lot of things. I want to have the social, and I want to have the fitness, and I want to have that. Really understanding to what degree you are going to focus on those things is super important. So the next thing that I wanted to share are some of these tips that are required for being able to find and maintain your authentic balance. So I'm going to go, this is actually pulled from chapter 1 of my book. So we'll see how many I can get through. And then there's 10 total, but I'll share a good number, and then if you want to find out the rest, you'll have to go get the book. Okay? So I already mentioned tip number 1, which is know that balance is not black and white. It's gray, right? So we already talked about this concept, being able to acknowledge that, like, when you say that you're trying to find balance, you've got to have that mindset of like, okay, if I want to be balanced, I need to know what that is, because if you're not, then you're basically just saying like, I want to find balance, and then you are navigating through life and winging it, which might not be bad, but you're not really focused on what's important. And so making sure that you understand what your definition is key. That's number 1. Gary, do you want to say anything before I move on? I know that that
Keep
was like,
going. No,
okay.
keep on rolling.
So I'll go to tip number 2. And this is huge, and you'll probably see it, and we probably talk about it in almost every webinar, because I think that when it comes to personal growth, it's the one thing that you cannot go without when it comes to growth. And it also applies to balance, is self-awareness. Self-awareness is the gateway to change. I think I've said this like time and time again, and I sometimes feel like I'm like constantly repeating myself, but it's so important. If you do not know what you want to change, or if you don't know what's happening, you don't know what decisions you need to make about what needs to change, right? Like, you need to be understanding of like how things make you feel, because if something feels good, then hey, keep doing it. But if something doesn't feel good, um, then you have the opportunity to make a different choice. And if you're not in tune with your feelings or your thoughts, or, you know, the actions that are being taken because of those external factors, you won't be able to make the decision of like, hey, you know, like maybe I should try this a different way, right? Like, I'm constantly paying attention to what triggers me and trying to analyze it, and maybe to a fault sometimes, but it's really really important for you to check in with yourself, even if there's nothing that's going on. And you can do this on a daily basis, on a weekly basis, whatever interval works for you, but you have to get into this practice of self-awareness, because otherwise you're going to continue to do the same thing, right? I feel like there's almost like we have to bring up like the whole definition of it, insanity,
Please.
here,
Yeah.
and maybe I'll let Gary do that a little bit. But it's really, really important to check in with yourself. It could be just a simple like, all right, how did today go? How do I feel about today? What was good? What was bad? What are the opportunities for improvement? What could I do differently tomorrow so that I don't feel the things that maybe weren't ideal today? You could do that at the end of every day. You could do it at the end of every week, but to say like, hey, how you doing? You doing good? You feeling good? Is everything okay? Because that will make you think inwards and say, okay, you know what? I don't like the fact that I did that to myself again, where I binge watched that show till 3 o'clock in the morning because I'm feeling it now. I'm feeling it today. I need to stop doing that. Actually, taking the action to do it is a whole different story, which we can probably talk about in one of the later tips. But having the awareness is what's important. Gary, what do you have to say to that tip?
I feel like that's critical because when we think about the brain, your brain's number one job is to keep you alive. And the brain is all about conserving resources. And this is so we're just going to lift the hood and look at the brain. Most people on a conscious level have a hard time grasping that there are things that they do that they didn't consciously decide. But think about this. If you've ever driven a car, I know in the beginning of learning how to drive a car, you're completely conscious. You're checking everything. But once you have done it time and time again, the brain knows the routine. And believe it or not, you go on autopilot. If you've ever driven somewhere and you're like, wow, how did I get here so quickly? Your unconscious mind was doing the work. That's amazing, right? The fact that we can do these things. It sometimes gets us in trouble when we have old habits and old belief structures that sort of show up, and we don't realize it. But we sort of justify like we did it. But again, it is what it is. And this point that April's making about self-awareness and checking in with yourself allows you to like sort of take inventory and say, all right, I did this, this, and this. Is that in alignment? All right, cool. No? All right. You know what? Like you said, we can address actually making the shifts that you need. But if you don't have awareness, how are you going to even know if you are above board or below board?
Mm-hmm. Totally. So, yeah, so self awareness is key. Check in with yourself, pinch yourself, like, am I still here? Is this good? Making sure that you are just noticing. If you can get into that practice, there's so much opportunity for you to grow. And I think it's funny because sometimes I will, talk myself into something and I'm like, I'm really realizing that, like, I am, showing up in fear when I do that. Why is that? And you can then analyze and you can move forward. So, tip number 2, self-awareness is the gateway to change. I'm like, now let me read to you from the next page. um, okay, this is another one. This is tip number 3. And this is huge, which when, for those of you who have gone into our annual planning retreat, which we had our very first one as a group last fall. But this is a part of that process that I think is super important, is that you need to know the values that drive your happiness. Okay. So everyone knows that I've got like 4 words that are my core values tattooed on my arms, right? They're the fun, accomplishment, connection, and authenticity. And these are the things that drive every single one of my actions, every single decision that I make, the type of people that I choose to surround me. They're primarily a lot of the values that we have in the ASC, like allowing yourself to have fun, but get stuff done, accomplish, right? And connect, bringing people together and doing it in a way where you can be completely self-expressed, because we're all different people. We want to try to stay away from judgment as much as possible, because if we continue to judge, we limit ourselves to seeing what's possible. So understanding what your personal values are. You might not have the same values as me. Gary, what are your top values? Because we do an
Yep.
exercise around values. And they could be, similar, they can be complementary and all that stuff. But Gary, what were your values again?
Yeah. Playfulness, curiosity, um, curiosity, uh, authentic, and supportive.
Yeah. So some overlap there, which is
A
which is
little bit.
great. Um, and knowing those values, this will help you craft some of your balance definition, right? And so this can be very easy as like going online and just Googling values assessment or something if you're not really sure what your values are. Or you can come join us at the annual planning retreat, and we can always, we can help navigate you through that process. One thing to know about values is that sometimes they can be very long-standing. Enough for me to tattoo on my arms. I know that this is how I generally am. But there are also other values that can come up and in this process that may come and go. Like one of the things that I realized with the pandemic is that I realized that like something along the lines of freedom, because being forced to stay in my house, like I was being very triggered, right? And a very easy way to kind of think about what your values are might just be thinking about like what makes you happy, like when you're in a really happy situation, what was the value that was being honored, and when you're being super triggered, what was the value that was being challenged. Super easy way. So when the pandemic first started, I was going through a lot of anxiety around not being able to leave the house and not being able to see the people that I love. So I knew that my value of connection, which is one of my core values, was being challenged big time. But then there was also this feeling of like, I don't like being told that I have to stay home. Like there was this freedom conversation that wasn't one of my core values, but I was starting to realize like, in this sense, it is, there's something around freedom. After thinking about it a little bit further, I realized that I think it was more of the flexibility because I like having structure, but being told like you have to be in this box and you can't do XYZ, I was thinking, okay, well maybe it's just I need to be able to like have a box that I can play in, that like I have my sandbox where like I have control or creative control over how the box looks and all of that stuff. But um you know that was exactly what I was missing. And so as time goes on and as you evolve through different stages of your life, you might have values that change, and some might stand the test of time. So if they're not going to stand the test of time, I wouldn't suggest putting them on your arms. But we'll see in like 10 years if I look at these and I'm like, these are still my values or not. And you might also have like 10 to 15 values. Like I value family, I just didn't choose that as one of my core values, because I think that lumps into the overall connection piece.
Can I
So
comment on that
yeah,
part?
yeah.
Like, as it pertains to values, that is something where a number of people they put that, like, yeah, it makes sense. Like family, work, faith, religion, like are their top values. And I like to say that your values should be a way of being, a way of growing, because it will help you be the authentic version of yourself. Like, you know, no one's going to question your level of commitment to your family or to your faith. However, if if you put family, I feel like the things that you put on your values, you never necessarily get, or you overcommit to them, especially if there's something along the lines of like family, this, that, and the other, because it becomes like your sole thing. Like, for example, if family was my number one value, which I love my wife and my son, and my, and all of that stuff, I would feel bad. I would feel incomplete because you can't you can't always commit to that. However, as you are seeing with the values that we're choosing, these are ways of being. These are going to help you be your authentic self. And yes, it may shift over time, or you may get to the point where, you've lived enough years where you're like, no, this is just who I am. And I'm ready to boom, tattoo them on my arms. Um, But the point here is that by having them, there, it allows you to sort of have a barometer of how am I showing up. Like for example, curiosity being one of my values, it allows me to stay engaged in all areas. Being a curious person, I can um, you know, uh, I don't want to like sort of give away any of April's sort of thunder of stuff she's going to talk about, but I can look at different areas of my life and I can say, how am I showing up curiously with my relationship to my wife? And I can be like, oh, you know what? I'm not. All right, cool. Now I can make a game plan. So this is important as far as values of keep working at it until you get something that just feels right. It's not going to be perfect right out of the gate. You have to sort of try it on like a pair of shoes, walk around in it, ask some questions of like, what does it look like to embody this value? And yeah, how does it show up? So
Yeah.
that's
And that
my two
builds, yeah,
cents.
thank you so much. And that, I mean, that's super key. I think that, it is really important. The values can be more powerful if they are a way of being rather than like a tangible thing. Not to say that you don't value your family. Like my family will take precedent number one. Like they're a top priority of mine, but is it what I value? And so, I mean, the lines can be crossed. And again, as we said, balance and all of this stuff that we're talking about is very subjective to you. So if you feel very strongly about family and family wants is that and that's your value, then that's completely fine. We are not limiting you, but I think that it is helpful, especially from the standpoint of creating a moral compass for yourself if you choose the way of being. And so when I think about authenticity as one of my values, I have a long-standing history of being a people pleaser and trying to do things to mold to what other people want because other people's happiness was my happiness. And I agreed to that to a certain extent until I started feeling resentful for putting all of my love into pouring into making other people happy that I left myself unhappy. And so then having to, redefine my balance to be okay, I need to like uplift myself and be a good friend and a good family member to myself, and treat myself the way that I would treat all of these other people. That changed things. But then also part of that, in the authenticity realm is like really being self-reflective of like, am I doing this because somebody else wants me to do it or because it looks good to the world, or am I doing this because I really want to do it? And so that's really important. And so the values kind of piles up on top of the self-awareness, right? Because in order to define your values, you have to be self-aware. So everything kind of goes hand in hand. So that's tip number 3. All right. Tip number 4, here's where I start going into like tactical stuff. You need to know how to prioritize and plan. Okay. So you understand that what your values are, and then we were saying the next thing was what are your priorities. So like I always know that my kids doing well in school is number one for me, and I will put my work aside if I have to, and I'll try to juggle it both. But if my son, as much as I'm trying to teach him how to be responsible, if he were to call me and say, I left my book at home, will you go bring it, like I would go do it, even though I would probably be like, you're messing up with my own time. But I know that that's my priorities. And so the piece of actually executing on balance is to understand what's important to you. So if it's important to make a living and have financial stability, that might be a priority. To attend to your family, that might be a priority. To be very social, to a certain extent, to travel the world, like those might be priorities that you have that you want to implement. But in order to make sure that you're not like firing on all cylinders and kind of going crazy and like being in very much reactive mode, you want to be able to plan. A lot of times I talk about, especially in our annual planning retreat, is this concept of having a flexible plan. I know that there are some people who are like want to just like ebb and flow through life and don't want to necessarily have a plan. And to that I say, that's great, but you're planning to not have a plan. So you want to just make sure that you understand what you want your life to look like and how you want to structure it. And for some people who have a lot of responsibilities, like I do volunteer work, I do this business, I have family, I have, the house obligations, I have all of these things that I'm juggling, my own like pleasure stuff, playing games and playing music and doing these things. I have to be intentional, or a lot of times if I just allow myself to be reactive, a lot of stuff doesn't get done. And so if you want to create balance for yourself, however you define it, it's really, really important to figure out some sort of structure to be able to attend to those things. Gary, you have any comments on that?
That's yeah, that's huge. Because like you said earlier, it's one thing to say, "Oh, yeah, I need to be doing that," and then you shit all over yourself,
Yeah.
uh, because you're not going to do it.
Yeah.
Actually identifying what are the things that make sense that need to be a priority, and having a framework that will allow you to achieve those things. And what I also like to tell people, especially if you're shifting to like a new focus in life, you're not going to be good at it yet. It's one of those things, and typically what happens is that you're you're sort of ambitious adult. You're one of those high functioning adults, type A personalities, that are accustomed to just, all right, cool, I'm going to do this and this. But what happens is you go and it's not comfortable for you, so you're not going to be as consistent, and then you're going to get discouraged, and then you're going to go back to old habits. The intelligent way is to make it easy for you. um put in a structure. That's one that's going to help you stay accountable, but like, how can you make it so it's like a no-brainer? Like, for example, back when we were able to go to places, and actually, it's been such a long time since I even started this. I made a commitment to my mom that we would go to spin together, at the gym. And the spin class that worked for both of us happened to be at 5:30 in the morning on Tuesday and Thursdays. And at first, it was so challenging to get up that early. And what I did to make it easy, I went to sleep in my gym clothes. I literally, put my gym clothes on, made sure my gym bag and my shoes at the foot of the bed. Boom, alarm went off. I got up, quickly brushed my teeth, put my stuff on, but like, I didn't have to think about it. And to be honest, up until the time when we couldn't do that, that was still my routine. It became like part of my process, but I made it so that I, had to think less. And so that is our, sort of tip for you as you're putting these things together, is like, how can you make it so you're winning? And that may mean that you have to do things easier and smaller, especially in the beginning.
Totally. Yeah. And so, it is for those of you who are like, I don't want to have a plan. Um, I think I would really advocate for it. And, I was already talking about the flexible plan, which kind of will be a good segue into my next tip that I'm going to share. But um, if you are somebody who, wants to move forward in life, it's really hard to do that if you don't have some sort of roadmap, as Gary was saying, and as I'm saying here. And it doesn't have to be super clear, right? You don't have to be like, okay, tomorrow I'm gonna do this, and this is, I'm gonna have to do these. Some of these things you might need, a more specific roadmap, but sometimes there's still a lot of questions that need to be asked along the way. But as long as you know kind of where you're going, um, this is a great framework to move forward. Which is why, and I hate, like, I don't hate. I'm plugging this whole annual planning retreat that happens every October, because like a lot of what I um, did in this book is what I implemented in the annual retreat. Is everything that gives you that structure, so you don't have to think about it. You just need to be told what to do, and then you can just do it. But then what you end up with is this like beautiful plan that and just like a roadmap of where you're going to go over the next year. And we don't think too far ahead because so many unexpected things can happen in a year. We know this especially firsthand in the last year that we've experienced. But it's just important to at least know what direction you want to go, or start to get that clarity, as if you are somebody who wants to continually grow personally and professionally. So as I was mentioning, this segues into my next tip, which is tip number 5. So you've got 5 of the 10 so far. And this is super important. Even though I want you to have a plan, I want you to embrace flexibility. I feel like this one was the tip that I think I needed to learn the most when I was writing it, because I am definitely the A-type personality that Gary mentioned, or I used to be. I think I've embraced flexibility a lot more now, um, which is you create too rigid of a plan, and when things unexpectedly show up, um, sometimes you can be holding on to that plan so tight that you cause yourself more grief than what is allowed, right? Or like what is normal, and you start like you end up wasting all this energy on these emotions by trying to hold too tight to something, because we can't predict the future, right? But we can inform, and we can work toward things in the future. We never know how things are going to come out. We don't know if we're going to be alive tomorrow, and so we have to make some assumptions on where we want to go, but then be able to embrace unexpected things that come our way, right? And so having that flexibility is just as important as having the plan. When we talk about in the annual planning retreat about creating a plan, and I can use my annual planning this year. This has probably been like the hardest execution of a plan this past year than in the 5 years that I've been doing it, because um, you you don't know sometimes, especially in COVID times, you don't know what you're doing next week. Sometimes you don't even know what you're doing tomorrow, and you kind of have to wing it. And so we don't go into this plan and be like, okay, here's what you need to do. There are certain aspects of your plan where you might say, okay, it's a project that I need to work on. So maybe for the first quarter, I'm focusing on this. Second quarter, I'm focusing on this. Third quarter, I'm focusing on this other thing, and then fourth quarter, I'm focusing on that. And you might have a general, and you might even have a little bit more detail, but you can also save that for later. You're just getting a general sense of like what your year might look like. So my specific example was that I had planned in October that my parents would be selling their house, that they've been living in for 35 years, in the spring around this time of the year, understanding that it would take some time for, they would be moving in with us, and they would be, kind of staying here temporarily while we found them another house, and then, working on getting them, transitioned to that house from here. So that was my plan, which I specifically wrote down. It was like, I don't want to do anything too heavy during second quarter and third quarter of 2021, because my parents are going to be moving and I'm going to have to deal with that. Well, 3 weeks later, after this retreat in October, my parents decided to put their house on the market, and it sold by December. So all of a sudden, my Q2 and Q3 plans were shifted 6 months before. And then my dog passed away. And then, COVID was preventing them from doing any travel. So we were all in a house for 6 months together, and still are to this day. And I love my parents, but that takes a toll. And I was still set on this idea of like, okay, my quarter one and quarter two are just like really getting into solid routines and doing all this stuff. But I had to basically take everything from quarter two and quarter three and slam it on top. And I was stressed. And a lot of it was me realizing that I was still trying to hold on to my plan. And I was being flexible and rolling with the punches with that. But there was this piece of like, I wanted to do these things during quarter one, and they're not getting done. And now I'm feeling like I'm getting nothing accomplished. And so having that lack of, flexibility, and it took me 3 months to realize like, oh, the reason that I'm so triggered is because I'm trying to do quarter one at the same time I'm trying to do quarter two and quarter three. And, luckily my parents are, going to be moving in the next month, and now we're going to get back onto it. But now I have to realize that anything I didn't get done in quarter one, I'm going to be flexible and like pushing it to quarter three, because I have basically shifted my plan. And so not having the flexibility can really cause all this unnecessary stress. And I mean, the stress could be there anyways, but like it could take you down a darker path. And I speak from experience, and just kind of knowing that, like, okay, I all of this is subject to move. And especially with COVID, we didn't know how soon we were going to be able to go back. Like, we're not even back at normal yet, so still trying to be able to roll with those punches and seeing like what's going to open up slowly, and being able to adapt to that is super important. Gary, you want to add anything?
Yeah, the main thing is I like to use this term VOCA, it's an acronym which stands for volatile, uncertain, complex, ambiguous, and it comes from the armed forces, where they have to be deployed in areas where they're not sure what's going to happen, and so they're essentially trained to be prepared to be flexible. In that, they know that they're ready because of this training, and this training prepares them to just be ready for the unexpected. And I feel like that's just how life is. It's important to make a plan. It's important to have structure, but at the same time, it's more of a guidance. It's not like a hard fast rule.
Yeah. So, yeah, so really, really important. So I've gone through the first 5 tips, and I'm seeing that we've got about 15 minutes, and there's a couple other things that I want to talk about. So if you want to know the remaining 5, which they're really, really good, go to Amazon and get my little purple book. It's a great read, I hope. Uh, I mean, it's good
It's a
enough.
great
Like,
read.
there's so much really great stuff, and I mean, sometimes I need to go back and read it, so I would definitely recommend it. Um, and you just get to get a sense of my style of teaching and all that stuff. Um, so one of the things that I wanted to share was, um, you know, Gary and I have kind of been putting this all in practice. I keep on mentioning the annual retreat, but like, when you focus on this concept of balance and really diving into not just like, you know, seeing where you're at. I didn't see what that said. I'm like, what are you
You have to
hiding?
wait.
Oh, okay. Um, I think it's really, really important to know that this is a tested theory or so, or framework to really finding balance. Most of, obviously, even though it's work life balance that I'm working toward, people don't typically like come to me and be like, I want work life balance. There's usually a goal tied to it, or still can't see it. I see Apryl something. Apryl is, oh, is it Apryl is a badass? It was blurry. Oh, thank you, Gary. Um, what I wanted to say was that, yeah, I'm like, what am I saying now? He's trying to distract me.
Sorry,
No,
my
no,
bad.
you're good. You're good. The we have put some of this stuff in practice, and again, people don't tend to say like, oh, I want work life balance, but something always like in the back of my mind that like, yeah, that's I want to feel balanced. I want to feel like I've got my shit handled, and all of that. And so um I wanted to share, some of the stuff that we do in the accountability success circle is really modeled around this. We don't talk about balance all day every day, but this is the foundation that at least I built the accountability success circle on, understanding that like we all want to grow, we all want to move forward with our lives, we want to accomplish goals, and how do we do that? And so um some of these success stories and things, I have clients that I've been working with since 2015 that have been able to find this balance. I've got some clients who have just been super frazzled, as they came in, and they're like, I just want to be able to like focus on the things that I need. A lot of the stories and a lot of the success comes from, and this is why some of this conversation has come up in previous ASC quickies and ASC webinars, is really about the boundaries and the values, right? Because if you know like what problems you are trying to like fix in your life, or challenges that you're experiencing, if you have your values, that can help drive um, the attention to those priorities. But then from the boundaries perspective, that has to do with communication. and really understanding with yourself, like what sorts of structures are you going to put in place to make the balance happen. Um, and I notice that, like, when I have struggles, a lot of the conversations end up being, so, like, what types of things do you have to put in place? What do you need to communicate to other people? And so, um, this is a foundation of everything, right? Because everything that we do is all based on our interactions with other people, with the external world, and setting up some sort of framework that so that we can play in our own little sandboxes and do the things that we want to do. And so, I don't even know if I allude to that in the book, but I think, after writing and just kind of experiencing life, like, it really does come down to the, it's still focused on that self-awareness, but when you start coming at it from the tactical perspective, and trying to implement balance in your life, it's really about setting boundaries and honoring your values. And so, if you're going to take anything from this webinar, I think that's one of the things where you can do a check on your own personal values and your own personal you know boundaries that you've set, because that is going to be the thing that's going to help you implement the balance that you seek. um some of the other things that we have implemented and that have worked for people when trying to find balance is, giving them some sort of planning and reflection process. And this can be from the daily to the weekly to the monthly to the quarterly. And we have these structures in place in the ASC, because it allows you to practice self awareness, and it allows you to do some planning, and then it allows you to reflect and celebrate what you're doing before you move on to the next thing. So, making sure that you're staying in gratitude. We talk about happiness, and your ability to be efficient can be based on your happiness. And so, making sure that we're shifting to a positive mindset all the time, that has been super helpful for people. I've definitely seen a lot of my own clients grow from, complaining about things a lot, and then being able to reframe to something more positive, and it takes away some of the heaviness and the weight that tends to slow us down. um, really thinking about, what is your focus for the day, right? It's like focusing on the priorities. What might be your 3 targets? Though that's a practice that we try to implement with people. If we don't do it on a daily basis, it's on a weekly basis. Like, what are your top 3 to-dos for the week? And then being able to reflect on them in the following week, or whatever interval is helpful. And those are different types of things that have been helpful for people. And so, um, obviously, in the ASC, seeking support on these things and helping create that structure, that's like my jam. So, that you can reach out to me for that. And Gary and Rebecca obviously can also support in that, because they have been listening to me, like, gab about this for years and years and months. And so, there's that. But I don't know, Gary, do you have any even success stories personally, or just things that you've seen in the ASC that have been super helpful? Any lessons learned um, while trying to implement this concept of balance? And it's not always at the forefront of our mind, but I want you to kind of think about it, as at least for this month, to see how that jives with you, and you know how you can leverage the concept of balance to, like, really accomplish your own personal goals and personal growth. But yeah, Gary, do you have anything to add?
I think it's all about the community too. Like I just want to point that out. Like there's just something about when you are around the people that have your back, and they have similar sort of um, interests. You could do awesome things just because you can use them as a sounding board. I know, I've seen so many successes that people have posted, and if you're watching and you want to comment on our thing about this, some specifics, let us know. But about how someone was stuck in this area, or they're looking to do this, and there was someone that happened to be 2 or 3 steps ahead, and that gave just the right amount of encouragement, and sort of like, yeah, you can do it. That just again helped you, get unstuck. So yeah, that's all I have to say.
For sure. Yeah, and I do think that that community aspect too. You got to surround yourself with good energy, because you take that draining energy, and then it prohibits you or hampers you from moving forward as well. So I think that that's good. But and so I think that that is all I wanted to share on this. There's so much I could talk about this for hours and hours and hours, but that's what the community is for. So if for those of you who are not in the Accountability Success Circle, come check us out at accountabilitysuccesscircle.com. We are always here to support you and give you, personal touch in a online community of our awesome 300 plus members who are really just working on crushing their goals and doing it in a fun and happy way. And we will be here for our next monthly webinar next month sometime, and we will announce the theme coming up very, very soon. Gary, do you have anything last words to add before we say goodbye?
No, I'm good. You nailed it
Yeah.
as usual.
High five. So again, thank you guys for tuning in, whether it was live or if you're watching the replay, whether you're in or out of the ASC, and we will see you next month.